Welcome back. You're watching Newslink on eNCA with myself, Ropwa Madzana. And a big focus today in the build-up to Human Rights Day tomorrow is human rights in South Africa. Masego Rahlaga currently at the Constitution Hill, where there will be a commemoration of Human Rights Day. Those proceedings set to get underway. And before they get underway, she'll be speaking to various voices. She's already spoken to one earlier on around the various issues that we are faced with as South Africans, including issues of hair, as an example, which is a big talking point in the country. She remains there. Masego, you're back with us, and you've got another guest to further delve into issues of human rights. Definitely, Rapua, and I mean, you alluded to that a little earlier on, and it's the Operation Tudula that we've seen, for instance, South Africans going to areas such as your Hillbrow, etc., even Orange Grove, saying that they're taking the law into their own hands. Is it vigilante? Do they have the right to actually say anything when it comes to businesses employing South Africans versus foreign nationals? How do they know, Rapua, that a person is in the country without their papers? How do they know that this person is actually an asylum seeker and is in need of government's assistance here in South Africa? So we do still have Gashwal Brooks, the spokesperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, but we're also joined by Sharon E. Kambaram. Am I correct? She is from the Kopanong Africa Against Xenophobia. Welcome to Newslink and to eNCA. Thank you very much for coming through. You heard me speaking to my colleague, Rapua. In recent days, we've seen young people, particularly in Johannesburg, basically taking the law into their own hands, saying that they're going to go into your abandoned buildings in Hillbrow and take out foreign nationals. A lot of people have said that this incites violence. It obviously started with a certain political party. What are your thoughts?
I think that it's incredibly dangerous. I think the South African police services, law enforcement in our country have to account for how this kind of behavior, unlawful behavior, it is vigilantism that is putting people's lives at risk, trampling on their basic human rights, their dignity. And that's what Human Rights Day is all about, as we go to want to celebrate our human rights. And we have this kind of behavior. And it's also, I think, the blame has to, and the responsibility for this has to be laid at the doorstep of politicians who scapegoat migrants and spread fake news, misinformed information about migrants in our country. And I think that's a serious, serious problem that results in the kind of violence that we are seeing in our streets today.
Some of these people, these young people, say that they want a threshold at businesses where, for instance, they'd say a restaurant should employ 70% South Africans and 30% foreign nationals. They have to be registered, etc. Do you think they have no place to ask for that?
This is a democracy. We have to hold our government to account, but we can't carry this out with vigilantism. The 69 people that were killed by the apartheid state died for our freedom to be able to hold our government to account. For me to be able to speak to you today on media is the sacrifice that they paid with their lives. But we have laws, we have a constitution, and we have to respect that constitution. And I think, Gershon will tell you, we have rights, but we have responsibilities as well. And I think that's the problem here. And finally, I just want to repeat this point, that on what basis are they claiming that the hospitality sector is employing 70% foreign nationals? Where is the evidence? And I think, how do you identify if someone is a foreign national or a South African working in that sector, unless you use the exact same means that the apartheid state used, of based on the color of your skin, you had privileges, whether you could live in an area like Hillbrow, which was whites only, or whether you had to live in a township or an informal place in our country.
And Gashwal, your thoughts about Operation Tudula, etc., that's been happening? Is a South African Human Rights Commission also planning to delve into that? Because, a lot of people, it's quite a huge debate at the moment.
Look, just picking up from what Sharon said, and I completely agree. I think that there's certain things that we need to put into perspective here, is that we do have laws in place, and that ultimately it's up to the authorities to enforce those particular laws. I think in any particular country you will find that there's, including democracies, constitutional democracies like our own, you try to strike a balance between migrants, or all international migrants, or cross-border migrants and local citizens. Those laws are always in place. And yes, people can ask for those laws to be enforced, but it's not up to people to enforce those laws in turn. It's not. And I think that it is extremely dangerous finding ourselves in this particular position whereby on the shape of your face, the color of your skin, your supposed accent, that connections are then drawn in terms of what your documentation status is, where you're from, and how you should be treated. And it's exactly what the apartheid system did. Remember, we used to have the code to determine what your race is.
Yeah.
And yes, there are deep concerns that the Commission is not blind to, that we are aware of. We live in the most unequal country in the world with rising poverty levels, rising unemployment levels, and yes, there are limited resources that people are competing for, and that does create tension between communities. But that does not entitle us then to ignore the authorities and the role that the authorities have to play in this, and then turn on people and then violate their rights and act in a criminal manner. So the Commission is deeply concerned by what we've been seeing, by some of the activities happening from different disparate groups. We are looking into it, and the Commission will take the necessary action when needed. And it's true, just as a final point, we do need our law enforcement to take a role here.
Sharon, I want to come to you. A lot of the foreign nationals are saying also that, they fled from their countries because it was unsafe. They came to South Africa because they felt they would be protected here. They felt that they would be able to provide for their families, and that, the government or whoever was looking for them in their countries of birth wouldn't find them where we are. A lot of them are here for various reasons, and I would say it's unfair to label all of them as the criminals that we cannot find because we don't know they're here and we don't have their fingerprints, etc.
I think what you've just described is what we have seen an increasing trend in our country of the criminalization of migration. So when the police are carrying out a raid on crime, what do? They arrest people for documentation. And so immediately in our heads as people in this country, we say, oh, all foreign nationals are criminals. They've arrested 10 people without documents. Now again, our immigration law sets out very clearly the procedure to be able to ascertain whether someone has their documents or not. And it's not by what language they speak. It's not whether they know the isiZulu word for elbow. Or there are very laws that fundamentally, first and foremost, respect your human rights and your dignity. Because that's what we fought for when we fought against the apartheid regime. The dignity of black people in this country was non-existent. There was, I don't need to go into that.
Yeah.
So I think that police, first and foremost, law enforcement agents, immigration officials, the Department of Home Affairs, what we are concerned is that there's deepening institutionalized xenophobia, and that's our concern. So I think that, if there are people that are undocumented, if there are issues, we have to ensure that we use the law, and that's how we're going to have a country which is transformed, that respects human dignity. And I think my concern is that this is targeted predominantly at our black African brothers and sisters coming from the African continent.
I was actually going to ask you, it's a twofold question. Firstly, do you think the media also, we have a responsibility to make sure that, for instance, if there's a heist somewhere or some crime that happens somewhere, we actually don't publish that 5 of them are from this country, 2 of them are from that country. Maybe we should stop doing that. But also, for me, it looks like xenophobia because it looks like black-on-black violence, because there's so many other people who own businesses and who run businesses here who are foreign nationals, but they're from Europe and they're a different color to me.
I mean, it's very, very easy for people from the north to come into Africa and to come into South Africa. But for us to move on the African continent, it is really, really hard. And I think that that question needs to be asked, is why are we investing in building walls to keep people out when we should be? The African Union is calling for free movement on the African continent. West Africa has free movement in that region. We need a SADC visa. Those are the ways of we're going to manage movement while respecting people's human rights and human dignity. And migration movement has been with us since the first, of humanity. It's part of our continue. There's going to be no walls that is going to stop people from moving. So, I think it's a serious concern that we are turning against our black brothers and sisters. And I want to say that xenophobia and racism are two sides of the same ugly coin.
Gasho, just in closing from you, after discussing with Sharon and yourself what has been happening in terms of xenophobic attacks in South Africa, etc., when it comes to, for instance, government, do you think that they're playing their role and they're playing it adequately to quell this? I mean, our first xenophobic attacks in South Africa were in 2008, and they were not the last ugly xenophobic attacks we saw, and maybe we're wasting time as a continent in making sure, like she said, we get a SADC passport maybe. Do you think government is doing enough?
I think we need to look at what the status quo is first, and like I said, we have laws in place, and including the Constitution and many other rights that protect the rights of all, everyone, including supposed undocumented migrants. Everyone has rights. Everyone's rights need to be respected. But simultaneously, there are laws and there are policies in place, and there are people that need to, quite frankly, do their jobs. We do have a migration policy and we do have migration laws. So in other words, you can only enter and exit based on certain circumstances. And yes, for example, if you're an asylum seeker and a refugee, and I was very lucky that prior to working at the Commission, I specifically worked with asylum seekers and refugees. And all too often when people are fleeing their homes because their villages are burning and their children have been killed, and this is not hyperbole, this is actual events that have happened, no one has time to look for your passport and grab that and then cross the border. But there are processes in place to take people in and to make sure that we're able to assist them as asylum seekers and refugees. A lot of that is being scuppered. We have corruption creeping in there. We have all people not quite blatantly not doing.
Also, actually, a human right violation.
Exactly, and a major focus of the Commission in the last financial year is the impact that corruption has on human rights, and I think that it's far-reaching. It impacts so many spaces. But you have that problem there, and people, quite frankly, not doing their jobs. But simultaneously, also is maybe we need to understand how is it then, if there is such a major concern with the number of undocumented migrants in the country, how do people then get in? And what measures is government, who's ultimately responsible for securing our borders, then? What steps and measures are they taking? The Department of Labour has a duty then to enforce labour laws, to ensure that certain numbers, whether it be the number of women that are employed in a particular space, persons with disabilities, equity based on race, they have a responsibility to audit that and to make sure that those are adhered to. What role do they play in ensuring that South Africans are getting the necessary number of jobs that they require, as opposed to non-nationals? That fuels the fire. And also and quite honestly, back in our own communities, if we have concerns about the businesses that are being run by non-nationals, how about not supporting those particular businesses and taking some agency as well? I've been involved in this debate for very, very long, and all too often people say they don't have a choice. Believe me, you have a choice in where you buy bread. Whether you have to walk a kilometer further or you have to, but so be it. But then support local businesses. So there are solutions to these problems, and I think, as Sharon had said, it boils down to scapegoating. And unfortunately, it comes at community level as well as a very high level.
Vigilante. Your last word, Sharon. I mean, for me, I've always said, and I have these conversations with my grandmother. She's 83 years old, so she's seen life. And I always have these conversations with my grandmother, because she's Tsonga. And she was not loved very much by her community. So that's where it started. It started with black people being taught that divide and conquer. So my colleague Teddy, who's behind the camera right now, is Venda. So I'm not supposed to like him because I'm Tswana. It's that type of thing. So do you think it also derives from that we don't love ourselves and each other here in South Africa, and now it's spiraled out of control?
Look, I have deep faith in humanity. And I think that a lot of the hatred and pain that we're experiencing, and the kind of, what you speak about, how we turn on each other, is located squarely in colonization and apartheid. And there's a lot of healing that our country has to go through. But I want to say that our government has to lead in respecting the Constitution, which is transformational at its very core. It demands that the government actually addresses the injustices of the past, and in that context transform the society. So, Gershon was speaking about the inequality. That's what we must be focusing our energy on, dealing with systemic unemployment, dealing with horrific conditions that people are living under. And I think that what's happening now is a direct consequence of the impact of COVID and the lockdown, and people who have already been poor have gone into even greater levels of poverty. That must be addressed, as opposed to blaming a few million people in our country who we have signed on to international conventions that we will receive refugees from the African continent and from all over. And so I think, it's important that we educate ourselves, but we also have to hold our government to account to carry out what the Constitution empowers them to do.
Thank you very much to the both of you. That was Sharon Ikambaram. She is from the Kopanong Africa Against Xenophobia, as well as Gashwal Brooks from the South African Human Rights Commission. Thank you very much for this first hour. Rufua, it's back to you. I mean, I was just telling them right now, that point about just because I'm Tswana, am I not supposed to get along with you just because you're from Venda? There's also that other topic, Rufua, just because I prefer to always have my natural hair or braids, and you prefer to have your natural hair and a weave every now and then, it doesn't mean I should violate your human rights just because I don't like that type of hair. It's back to you in studio.
That's absolutely very true, Masego. And one important thing that you touched on, which is quite a sensitive topic for me in particular, is the fact that we have big issues of tribalism in South Africa. And very often, Venda people, Tsonga people are looked down upon by other cultures and tribes within the country. And so those are narratives that are going to need to change.